Hello, welcome to this episode of my pilot podcast. I'm so glad you're here with us today because today's guest, Parker Madill, has been flying all sorts of Textron aircraft, and I asked him today to share about the Hawker 800 XP. Parker, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Well, tell me how many type ratings you have. How many different Textron planes do you fly, or have you flown?
Yeah, it's an ever increasing number, but I'm proud to say that I've got 5 type ratings. More recently, I've acquired the Citation 525 type rating, King Air 350 type rating, and the Hawker HS 125 type rating, which is kind of all inclusive for the Hawker series, among some others that I've accumulated in my career.
That's so great. Well, I appreciate your insight on the Hawker today. Tell me a little bit about the performance of the Hawker, because it didn't come from the Textron line at the beginning. It came from Raytheon, and then kind of migrated over the years into a Textron product through a couple of acquisitions. But so its performance is a little bit different than a classic Cessna would be. Tell me a little bit about the performance.
Yeah, sure. So like you mentioned, the Hawker jet comes from a long lineage that started way back when it was a prototype for de Havilland, and through the various buyouts turned into a Hawker Beechcraft product, and now supported by Textron Aviation. But the thing that sets the Hawkers apart is really cabin size and overall performance compared to our other lighter CJ aircraft or medium-sized Cessna products, the Citation products. The aircraft goes all the way up to 41,000 feet, and based on model, likes to sit there and be more economical. It's a powerhouse on the ground and has really good runway performance as long as the weather's amicable. Most of our customers have enjoyed the seating configuration because it's a real wide and real tall cabin for that model of airplane. So being able to go over 2,000 nautical miles, I don't know how many times myself and colleagues have flown that airplane going over 6 hours and going coast to coast, and we're just astounded because you really can't do that in a lot of the lighter jets available in the market today.
Well, that's one of the things that makes it so popular as a charter aircraft, are the long legs and the roominess in the cabin for the price point at which you can operate it, right?
That's right. Yeah, it's a really good entry-level jet, just because of all that you stated. I mean, it's a solid Mach 7.7, 7.8 cruiser, and it'll go up there, up to in the 40s, no problem. You can stuff 60 with all their bags and cargo and just go forever. It's a pretty good performer on most runways. I will say that we have to be careful when it starts to get wet outside, just because of the performance numbers on the accelerated takeoff numbers. But other than that, people love it because it's got a wonderful cabin. It's very quiet on the inside, very comfortable, and it just offers a lot of flexibility for the charter market.
What mission do you typically see the Hawker 800 flying?
Yeah, so the Hawker 800 specifically does a really good intermediate range mission. I would say that most of the time I see it on missions over 800 miles and up to about 1,600 nautical miles seems to be the sweet spot. It'll certainly go a lot farther, but that means that everybody, pilots and passengers alike, are in the seat for 5.5 to 6 hours. And I think most of us would agree that that's just a lot of time to be in a seat if you don't need to be. So rarely do we extend it that over 2,000 nautical mile range, but it's a really good intermediate range aircraft.
Tell me about the fuel burn in the plane, especially for those longer legs.
Yeah, so the overall capacity of the airplane is a little under 10,000 pounds of usable fuel, and that translates into about 6 to 6.5 hours of endurance based on your reserve needs. Because of the thrust output rating of the engines, down low, it is a fuel burner. I think most of us are comfortable calculating 1,800 pounds to 2,000 pounds of fuel burn for that first hour. So that's what kind of keeps it out of the short range market. Is if you're doing an hour and a half long leg, it's a big fuel cost comparatively to some of the other light jets available. But once you get up into the high 30s and 40s and start cruising, the fuel burn goes way down, and we can start to bargain for 1,400 to 1,600 pounds per hour. Especially if you pull it back to a slower Mach number. You trade a couple of minutes here on the back end, you save some extra fuel, it's a win-win, and you're still getting there in an economical measure.
Well, I'd like to talk a little bit about what happens in the cockpit and about the ease of working in the Hawker cockpit, or is it a little bit more difficult than some of the other aircraft that you fly?
Yeah, that's a good question. These airplanes having come out of prototypes from the 60s and 70s, the British engineering teams put a lot of switches in these airplanes. So at first glance, you look around the cockpit, and some people compare it to looking at the space shuttle, right? There's just switches everywhere. They go three different directions. But once you get to know the airplane and understand the way that it's laid out and how simple the airplane really is to operate, it becomes a lot less fear evoking, if you will. It's laid out really well. The switchology is nice because systems are grouped together. So once you understand, okay, this panel is electrical, this panel is hydraulic, this panel is pressurization and air conditioning, it's not nearly as foreboding as it was when you first stepped in. It lends itself really well to flows, which a lot of pilots are familiar with. So once you have a flow worked out, it's a really easy airplane to get to know, especially in a two crew environment. A lot of the products that I'm in are single pilot operated or two crew operable airplanes. And so you have to jump back and forth from how would I fly this airplane single pilot versus two crew. The Hawker Jet obviously is a two crew only airplane. And so you fall into a syncopation, if you will, with your co-pilot or co-captain. And once everybody's familiar with it, it just flows really well. And the switches aren't as confusing as they look like.
Wow, that was a great explanation. I really appreciate that. Is it comfortable sitting in that cockpit? How's the ergonomics of being in there and climbing in and leg room and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, it's interesting. Once you go in the cabin of the airplane, you actually step up a little bit into the cockpit, which I thought was interesting the first time that I got in there. But sliding into a captain or first officer seat is actually pretty easy. The seats do slide backwards quite a ways. And then once you slide into the airplane, there's several ways that you can shift the shape of the seat. And what was different for me was I could actually move the foot pedals forward and back quite a bit. Usually other lighter airplanes have like forward and back settings, right? One for really long-legged people and for short-legged people, and no intermediate. So having a variety of settings was a big plus for me. The cockpit's laid out really well, so there's lots of shoulder and head room, despite how high up the seat may be or low. It was very easy to get comfortable in the airplane, and switches and knobs and dials and throttles are all well within reach, which I thought was very nice to have. The seat has a lot of different ways that you can move it: lumbar support, reclining. It's even got this funky little part where the part of the seat pan underneath your knees will actually click down if you extend your legs all the way out, as if you were doing full rudder deflections, because the engineers knew that in a comfortable position, that might impede on my ability to do a full rudder deflection. So it's got this quirky little popping noise that it makes, and it's an interesting operation. Another unique feature is the ram horns on the yoke, which took a little while to get used to because I'm used to a traditional yoke. But once you get used to the ram horn configuration, it just felt a little bit more comfortable within my, with my hands on the horns and moving the airplane, rolling it left and right. It was really easy to get used to, and I thought a lot more comfortable sometimes than a normal yoke configuration. So real pleasure of a cabin and a cockpit to be in for certain.
Well, moving back, what's it like for the passengers?
Yeah, so moving back, one of the interesting things that people find in the Hawker Jet is once you walk up the entryway, you are looking at the main cabin cargo system. So the Hawkers, unless there's a additional optional ventral cargo area installed, all of the cargo is inside the cabin. So there's a big cargo area on the passenger's left side as they move aft toward the cabin. And that's a Hawker pilot's best or worst part of the airplane. If you're really good at Tetris, no problem. But you have to get creative with how to get 8 people's luggage within the majority of that cargo space. so that's kind of an interesting feature. Walking back, they also pass a nice little galley, coffee, water, sodas, and I think that that's really well put together. And then when you get into the main cabin with all the seats, I mean, the seats in the back of the Hawker are just phenomenal. Personally, I think they're some of the largest seats you can find in this size of an airplane. Super comfortable. They rotate left, right, forward, back. Very easy to get comfortable in those seats. And then additionally, you'll typically find a settee or a couch in the back of the airplane, depending on configuration. Some airplanes only have 6 captain style seats because they have 2 F cargo closets. If there's one closet, there may be a couch or settee on the left or the right plane. It just kind of depends on which one you find. And as typical Hawker pilots will say, if you've seen one Hawker, you've only seen one Hawker, because the next time you get into another one, configuration will be completely different and unfamiliar, and you just have to kind of get used to all the different variants they ever produced.
Well, there are more women buying aircraft these days, finally. And
Mm-hmm.
one thing that I hear from my male clients who have wives that are influencing the decision, or from women who are buying an aircraft, is what about the lav? First, is it private? And 2, is it big enough that I could put makeup on it?
Yeah, that's a really good point. A lot of the lighter jets in this segment have a very utilitarian lavatory, if you will, that usually doesn't offer much privacy, whether it's got a curtain or a semi-solid door. The Hawker has a full lavatory in the aft section of the airplane. It's got a massive solid door that locks with a little occupied sign, which I think provides a lot of privacy. It's got lighting galore in back there. So there's a light around the mirror and a light on the wall. So it's very well lit. There's an additional reading light if you needed even more lighting. Electric flushing toilet makes it very easy and comfortable to use. There's a sink with a vanity. So I've seen a lot of configurations where there's even a little, basket there with some toiletries and whatnot. I mean, if you really needed to, you could probably shave and do everything else except shower in the back of the lavatory. So it's very comfortable, and a lot of people do enjoy it because it's a lot more spacious than even some of the better lavatories available in the light jet market. So yeah, it's an impressive feature for sure.
I found that to be true as well. You've talked about the baggage area being up front. Can you talk about how much baggage we can carry on a Hawker? What's the weight limit?
Yeah, so I typically find I have a hard time getting, 300, 350 pounds of baggage in that space, because typically we're not hauling around, sandbags or gold bullion, if you will. So most of the time we will, what we call bulking out the capacity, right? All the bags occupy all the space. We've got the cargo net up and cinched down as tight as we can get. So in the larger seating capacity for 8 passengers, we can typically find space for cabin crew and passengers bags for, a week-long trip or less. If we start to get into the big travel cases and whatnot, or oddly shaped cargo, we have to get a little bit more creative with how we pack. I will say from experience that if someone said, hey, we're going to take a trip, 6 people, all golfers, going to California for the week, I'm going to start to worry a little bit, to be honest, because that cargo area does not have a shape that fits square bags and long, round golf bags very well. So I'll use some of the aft closet space and just kind of have to get creative with where I put all those golfing bags. Another travel destination would be the mountains, right? Skis and snowboards, and sometimes those just don't fit well. And so that requires extra coordination to figure out, hey, can we FedEx these out before and after, rather than trying to put them in an unsafe place in the airplane. There are some creative ways to safely secure some of that cargo, but just not a lot of it. So, hauling 8 people for a weekend trip, great, no problem. Smaller checked-in size bags, backpacks, soft goods that fill spaces a little bit easier, no problem whatsoever.
Great to know. Tell me about the maintenance and the reliability of the Hawker.
Yeah, so the airplane's really sturdy. And I know that's kind of a vague term to be talking about an airplane, because they're all sturdy, right? We fly them up in the atmosphere and then they come down and make tens of thousands of landings in their lifetimes. But I think most people after flying a Hawker will appreciate how intricate the design was on almost every feature of the airplane, from the wing structure to the fuselage to the landing gear. You know, a lot of time and energy went into these airplanes. And the amazing part was a lot of these airplanes were developed before computers were used for a lot of this design work. So well overbuilt for certain. The systems in the airplane are a little bit more complex, but still fairly easy to understand and rely upon. Maintenance wise, it really comes down to what the airplane's been used for. You know, if you've got a 10 to 15-year-old 800 XP that's got 4,000 hours on it, that's been babied by a private owner or a light charter company, no problem. Personally, I've flown some of the 6, 8, 10, 12,000 hour airframe airplanes that were used by NetJets in a previous life that are coming into their second lives. And the things that work great on the airplane, 100% reliable. But because of their age and their wear and tear, you know, you do find some unique aspects of those airplanes that start to degrade and need replacing. And unfortunately, some of those systems or components, regardless of how small they are, can turn into somewhat significant AOG events. So from a buyer's perspective, I always caution people, you know, solid pre-buy, make sure the airplane's been flown recently, and you'll be all set. If this is an airplane that's been sitting for a while, just be cautious. I mean, yeah, they're great buys because of their low entry cost, but I would caution that with a tale of make sure that you've got some money in the bank just in case it goes AOG on you, because it's going to cost you. That being said, having served a particular role for Textron Aviation in the past, I would say that there's no better place to get your airplane service while you're on the road, and their support network is solid. I know people's experiences will vary, will be different from my opinion, but man, just the amount of people that have worked on Hawkers in the United States, plus the OEM support that is available, I mean, it's a hard network to be honest.
I agree. And, you know, we've observed that over the years as Textron bought Hawker Beach and really merged the two companies. And I think that the job that they've done with integrating the service for all of their lines of aircraft has been exceptional. I've not heard complaints or gaps or lack of support for a non-original Textron product. And I'm really glad that they paid a lot of attention to that. I think it's created a space in which Hawkers and Premiers can still be very well supported and very well selling private jets to get into as an entry level plane. Parker, thank you so much for being on with me today about the Hawker. As we close, best thing about a Hawker and worst thing about a Hawker 800?
Well, that's a good question. I would honestly have to say the worst thing about the Hawker 800 is probably just its wet, contaminated fuel performance. I love the airplane, but just because it's raining outside or there's a little bit of snow, you really feel about where you take that airplane in and out of. And that just takes some technique and getting used to. So solid pre-flight planning will help take care of that 100%. But that has caused some challenges for me in the past. Favorite thing about the airplane, man, it is just a rocket ship. There's nothing like taking that thing out light and going somewhere and just climbing for the sky and getting an unrestricted climb. It is just such a fun airplane to fly. It's hardy, it's reliable, it's sporty in the roll rate. I mean, it just does whatever you want, and you feel like you're driving a tank while you're driving a sports car at the same time. It's an amazing airplane to fly from a pilot's perspective.
It's like a Range Rover.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
There we have it.